This all started with a question of what was the first baseball card, and not only did I not know, but my guesses were wrong, which led me to what is the history of baseball cards. So I've done a lot of research, and you'll be surprised what I've learned. Now, it's pretty well recognized that baseball came from an English game called rounders, and previously we used to think that baseball was a North American development of rounders, and it was almost invented here. But more recent research suggests that the game of baseball actually originated in England, and there's been recently uncovered historical evidence that supports this, where rounders and baseball were sort of regional variations of the same game. In fact, the Prince of Wales, there's a document here of him playing baseball on September 19th in 1749. Now, the first officially recorded baseball game in North America was played in Canada, in Beachville, Ontario, in 1838. But the contest, or the baseball game that is most recognized as the first officially recorded baseball game in the United States, took place on June 19th in 1846 in Hoboken, New Jersey, where the New York Nine baseball team defeated the Knickerbockers 23-1 in just 4 innings. And this is actually the official document from the Library of Congress of that game. You can see the score of 23 runs there, and then an artist's depiction of the event. Now, while the Knickerbockers lost this game, they would actually go on to help write the rules of baseball over the next 50 years. So the Knickerbocker Code became some of the groundbreaking fundamentals of the rules of baseball. Flash forward to 1860, and there's a team called the Brooklyn Atlantics, and they were dominating baseball in New York. In fact, they won their championship in 1859, 1860, and 1861. So having won several championships, they made a visiting card that is considered the earliest dated baseball card, which was a souvenir handed out to fans and even opposing teams when they traveled. And this is an example of one of those cards from 1860. This SGC Grade 3 recently sold for $270,000, and there's the team right there. Now, that year, in 1860, the Atlantics expanded their range and accepted a challenge from a team in Boston called the Tri-Mountain Club. And the game was played on the Boston Commons in front of almost 3,000 people. And the Brooklyn Atlantics won by a score of 107-16. So apparently there was no mercy rule back then. That leads us to 1861 to 1865, when the American Civil War broke out. It's really hard to think of how old a game baseball is when it started, not only maybe 100 years before this in England, but before the American Civil War. And actually, the Civil War has been attributed to increasing the spread of baseball across the United States, as off-duty Union soldiers often taught the game to soldiers, and officers encouraged the games to kind of foster morale and camaraderie among the troops. And then Northern servicemen who were held in Confederate prison camps introduced the game to the South, and this is actually a picture that was taken of the Union prisoners at Salisbury, North Carolina, where they were teaching the game of baseball to the soldiers in the South. So by the time the Civil War came, baseball really overtook most of the other ball and bat games like cricket and so forth, because in part it was a much shorter game and you didn't need a specialized field. You could play it anywhere. In 1868, a sporting goods store in New York called Peck and Snyder began producing baseball cards featuring popular teams. And they sold baseball equipment and sports equipment and used baseball cards as an advertising campaign. These are sometimes considered the first baseball cards, but as you can see, we identified the Brooklyn Atlantics as coming first. And here we are in 1882. The Peck and Snyder cards are still around. They've even improved in appearance. I was surprised to see that on eBay today you could buy this one for about $300, and you can see the back of the card is an advertisement for the sporting goods store, which is a pretty great idea. Now we're into 1886, where tobacco manufacturer Goodwin and Company started to make their own trading cards under the Old Judge and Gypsy Queen brands. You can see these kind of old-fashioned sepia-toned images that they used, but they later got to these multicolor pictures here on the right-hand side in front of a blue sky, which the whole set had the same kind of blue sky appearance. The Old Judge set was very popular because it was huge. There were over 500 players with over 3,000 variations available due to some of the cigarette brand and advertisements on the back. And let me show you a zoom in. I love this card. This is actually one that I'm looking to buy. I don't like the pinholes in it, but what I think is hysterical is that they're clearly not on a ball field. It's like an artist rendering of the background. And they're reenacting probably a play at second base where someone's sliding in, and he's clearly just laying on the ground. So I get a kick out of that specific card. I will find that card in a better condition and buy it. In 1888, Allen and Ginter was also a tobacco manufacturer and started creating their own brand. Now, you might recognize this one because Topps would acquire this company and later bring this back in some of the modern like throwback cards. But this is where they originally started, and they were pretty colorful. There were freebie promotional items that were given out for the cigarette brand. And then the early 1900s really continued with tobacco company, and then now new like candy companies gained into the mix. The first major set after the 1900s was the Bryce and Williams Company out of Oxford, Pennsylvania, and then a bunch of other companies, including the famous American Tobacco Company. We'll talk about the American Caramel Company in just a second as well. And now 1909 to 1911 might be the most famous old baseball card set of all, which is the T206. So I'm sure you've heard the story about Honus Wagner, who was one of the best baseball players at the time. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's a great baseball player. The legend is he either wasn't properly compensated for his card, or he didn't want his image to be associated with tobacco products. He requested not to be included, but they believe about 20 to 50 of his cards got into circulation, and that's why this SGC3 example recently sold for $6.6 million. Growing up, the T206 Honus Wagner was the most valuable baseball card. I think it was the first one to ever go for $1 million or more. And today, you can get low-graded common cards of the T206 for just $100. And what I really like about them is the back of the cards have different brands of cigarette advertisements. So these are pretty awesome and actually reasonably affordable because they were so popular and a number were made. I think I read that over 180,000 of these have actually been graded. So there are cards from this set back then that are still available in circulation. Now, this is a Technicolor picture of New York City that was taken in 1910, and it just gives you a sense of like how old America was when these cards were produced. There were no Band-Aids because they hadn't been invented, no toasters, there were no zippers on clothing, there were no bras, there were no beer cans, and no traffic lights. And these were sold as part of the cigarette boxes here, these little cigar stores where the arrow's pointing. So that's an actual store you could go in and get one of these T206 cards. Now, I found an amazing video here from the Junk Wax Hero who went out and bought himself his own T206 tobacco box with a card inside. And so you can check him out. He shows the opening of it. This is an amazing keepsake. He got a great deal on it for only $300. And the box and the card are in really good condition considering. So I'm super excited to show you kind of what that would look like at the time. Now, not only are the baseball cards a way of getting people excited and kind of advertising, but they actually served as a way to reinforce the box and make your cigarettes not be crushed. So they were kind of a reinforcement for these kind of thin paper boxes as well at the time. If you're getting value out of this so far, please give us a like. This is a production of Sports Cards Edge, and our goal is to help give you an edge making money with sports cards. We really appreciate any follows and likes that you can get. Now, these happen to be my T206s that I recently purchased. You can get them for about $100 each. They're mostly commons. I'm a big Red Sox fan, so I got the Boston team here. I got them each for about $100, and it's amazing to me. I know in a 1 or 2.5 out of 10 that they're not pristine gem mint condition, but I'm actually amazed at how great they look for being over 100 years old, and that somehow they made it into my hands over all that time. It's really, really amazing. From 1911 until 1914, candy and gum cards became as popular as the tobacco cards. Here, the offerings are from the American Caramel Company, as well as Cracker Jack, which is just amazing to see Cracker Jack way back then. And so these are being sold now as baseballs get more popular, in addition to just the tobacco cards. And then in 1914, World War I started and lasted until 1918. Now, the United States tried to remain neutral for some time, and it wasn't until 1917 that the U.S. entered the war and mobilized over 4.7 military personnel and suffered a loss of over 116,000 soldiers. And the estimates for all of World War I would be that 9 million lives would be lost. The war obviously saw a dramatic expansion of the U.S. government, and actually started the United States becoming a global superpower in the military. After the war's the Roaring '20s, we have Babe Ruth as one of the baseball stars with kind of smaller, lesser-known brands here. We got chocolate brands and so forth, and a bunch of different cards throughout the '20s. And then, this is what's just amazing about baseball, the Great Depression hits. So between 1929 and 1932, the worldwide GDP, or gross domestic product of the world, fell by 15%. In the 2008-2009 Great Recession, the worldwide GDP fell by only about 1%. So this was just the longest, deepest, most widespread depression in the history of the 20th century, and obviously had a big impact on baseball. So through the Great Depression, attendance to baseball games plunged by about 70%, and disposable income was hard to come by, and so new ideas and new gimmicks were needed. So there was ticket giveaways with baseball tickets. Baseball also introduced radio broadcasting, an all-star game, and Goudy Gum produced one of the most popular vintage card issues of all time, which is the 1933 Goudy set. This was known as the Big League Chewing Gum set, and it's most popular for the 4 different Babe Ruth cards. On the left here, we have his red card, number 149, which I believe was double printed, so there's more of these. And then on the right-hand side is the most famous, which I think is a little bit short printed, because it was one of the shorter printings in this set. His number 53 is his most rare and most valuable. PSA 9 recently was valued at $5.3 million. But the one of him on the mound here swinging his bat, or I guess he's in an on-deck circle, you can get into a PSA 1 or 2 for that at a relatively reasonable price, and that's kind of the one that I'm targeting for my long-term personal collection. 1939, we've got the Play Ball Ted Williams card. And Ted Williams is most known for hitting over 400. In 1941, right before the last 2 games, where were a doubleheader of the season, he was batting .39955, which would have been rounded up to 400. And the Red Sox Hall of Fame manager, Joe Cronin, offered him the chance to sit out the final game, and he said, if I'm going to be a 400 hitter, I'm not going to go there with my toenails on the line. And Ted Williams went 6 for 8 that day, finishing the season at 406. And back then, sacrifice flies were counted as at-bats. So under today's rules, Ted Williams would have hit anywhere between 411 and 419. But he was a great hitter. That's the last 400 hitting season. And then his career was interrupted, of course, by World War II. So 1939 to 1945 was World War II. The vast majority of the world's large powers, including the Axis and the Allies countries, all were involved in the war. And this was just a huge mobilization of resources. So baseball card production came to a screeching halt in 1941 as there was rationing of paper and gum, and so fans would have to wait until Leaf came back in 1948 after the war to produce major amounts of cards again. In 1948, Leaf came out with these cards. Here's some Ted Williams cards. Ted Williams joined the Navy Reserve in 1942, then joined active duty, and was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps as a naval aviator. He didn't return to baseball until 1946. Leaf began producing cards in 1948, and other manufacturers, as you can see, including 1950 Bowman. I actually love this 1950 Bowman Ted Williams. That is on my must-have list, and at a very reasonable $475. This PSA 5 version was recently sold. This leads us to 1951, where we have the Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie. This is his kind of major produced rookie, and it's amazing. We'll get to the Topps card next. It's a beautiful card. It's actually a year beforehand, before his Topps card came out. But at the time, Topps started making these red back and blue back baseball cards as part of what was supposed to be a playing card game that did not catch on. And so there was a Topps employee called Cy Berger who had the idea, and he designed the 1952 Topps set, which is like the most iconic, probably baseball card set of all time. This is the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle that recently sold for $12.6 million in SGC 9.5 version. Cy Berger worked with Topps, and he designed the set with his buddy Woody Gelman on the kitchen table of his apartment on Alabama Avenue in Brooklyn. So this made Cy an unlikely hero who actually was honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1988 with the development of the modern baseball card. This is an iconic set, obviously, and it began Topps' dominance into baseball cards, which would almost turn into a monopoly. And then I just want to share the 1953 Topps Mantle, which actually might be maybe my favorite of these two. To me, it looks awesome, and you can get into a PSA 1 or PSA 2 for a somewhat reasonable $1,000 or $2,000 price, depending on the grade you're going for. Now, 1955 to 1956, this is where the Topps monopoly comes about. For the early 50s, Topps and Bowman were the big players making baseball cards. And they would each go out and try to sign exclusive contracts with the players to be the only one that could produce their cards. In fact, between these sets in the early 1950s, sometimes Bowman didn't have a specific player, sometimes Topps didn't have a specific player, because they were all trying to sign players to exclusive contracts. But both companies were spending around $100,000 a year, which in today's dollars would be $1.2 million a year, just fighting each other and signing contracts. So in 1956, Topps made Bowman an offer for $200,000 to buy out the company, which actually led to decades of Topps being a monopoly in the sports card world. 1957, in part because of the monopoly Topps has acquired, they did a couple of things. They shrank the dimension of the cards to 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, which is now the standard that remains the basic format size for most sports cards produced in the U.S. And then Topps, you'll notice, also started using color photographs in their cards. So this is really a groundbreaking set, not only after the acquisition of Bowman, but in the appearance and size of the cards. Now, the next company to challenge Topps was Fleer. So in 1959, Fleer signed Ted Williams himself to an exclusive contract and created an entire set of cards just around Ted Williams. Unfortunately for them, Ted Williams retired from baseball the very next year, and they had to produce a different set of basically retired players. It never really caught on. Topps held on to the rights of most of the players, and ultimately Fleer was kind of pushed out. Fleer did file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission saying that Topps was engaging in unfair competition through this monopoly of exclusive contracts. And the examiner originally ruled against Topps, but then a commission reversed the decision on appeal, saying that Topps was only gained the exclusive rights to sell cards with gum. So competition in theory could exist by selling other small, low-cost products with cards, but Fleer chose not to do so at that time. Keep that in mind as we get to the later parts of the Topps monopoly. So the 1960s is pretty much cruising with Topps. Topps made some awesome-looking cards, awesome-looking sets. They're the monopoly in town. These are just some examples I pulled out of kind of the different famous styles and years, and obviously players of the 60s. And it's at 1969 that Topps licensed production to Canada, which was a candy company, O-Pee-Chee. O-Pee-Chee sets were made identical to Topps sets until 1969, when the backs of the cards had to be branded O-Pee-Chee, and due to federal law, O-Pee-Chee had to add French language to the back of its cards, which you can see here. You can see both the French language ad for the records and also printed in Canada. And then throughout the 70s, there was just a smattering of competition for Topps. These are amazing. So Kellogg's actually had these 3D Superstar cards early in the 1970s, putting them into boxes of cereal. There weren't that many cards, and it was more about selling the cereal rather than the card itself being the focus of the purchase. And then Hostess started putting cards you could cut out on their boxes, which I remember having some of these as a kid, which is just amazing to me. But because these were much smaller items and the cards really didn't gain a lot in popularity, Topps didn't take any action to stomp them. And then in the 1970s, you'll see cards like this where Topps started putting the autographs from the players' contracts where they signed exclusive rights to be on Topps and their baseball cards. They would put them on the cards. We got Thurman Munson and Robin Yountz. Those are their signatures on the contracts with Topps that they've put onto cards, which is actually pretty cool. And then Topps is just cruising along through the 70s, doing pretty well. Then we hit 1981, which is the end of the Topps monopoly. So in 1975, Fleer sued again to break Topps' monopoly, and in 1980, a federal judge agreed to end Topps' exclusive rights to sell baseball cards, allowing Fleer and Donruss to enter the market in 1981. They both sold their initial cards with gum in the packs, and then Topps countersued, and it was deemed that Topps' exclusive contract was for gum, and so Fleer included stickers, team logo stickers, and then Donruss included those puzzle pieces, which no one really cared about. But the most important thing is now there's actually major players producing cards again in the baseball world, and this is the world that I grew up in, collecting baseball cards. So if you wanted to collect a rookie card, all of a sudden there were 3 rookie cards you had to get. So the chase is on for rookie cards because those are the most popular and the most sought-after cards in the market. So Topps in 81, as sort of a response to this, started introducing Topps Traded. And so I pulled the 82 Topps Traded as an example where Cal Ripken had an 82 Topps card as a rookie, but then he was such an all-star that they wanted to be the first to get his rookie card out there. So instead of waiting to the 1983 set, they introduced the Topps Traded in 82 and gave Cal Ripken probably his most famous standalone rookie card of all time. Topps continued this tradition since 1981 of a Topps Traded set of 132 cards for players who changed teams or new rookies and so forth. And despite Topps doing this, the 1984 Donruss Don Mattingly rookie card became one of the most popular and iconic cards of all time. And so this race between the major companies and popularity, the Donruss set was considered the most desirable of that year of any of the manufacturers, in part because I think it was short printed compared to the other ones, and obviously the popularity of Don Mattingly. So Topps again got pretty creative and started signing minor league card contracts. So they went to the 1984 Olympic baseball team and got exclusive rights to their baseball cards. And so in 1985, they introduced in the regular top set the Mark McGwire Olympic baseball card, which became one of Mark McGwire's earliest rookies and was kind of a boon for Topps to get the first run at some of the biggest players to come along at the time. 1986, this is kind of a quirky one, but Sportflics was introduced. So lenticular and specialty print manufacturer Optographics obtained a Major League Baseball license to produce these motion cards. If you're not familiar with lenticular motion cards, there were 3 different images on them. I think they said 3 in 1 action, and it would be like a static picture of a player, and then 2 images of like a swing or them running, which is actually pretty cool. I have a bunch of these. I bought some recently. I didn't realize how short the run for Sportflics was. Having bought them again, I remembered them looking better in my childhood. They're not the best looking cards, actually, even in person still today. 1986 and beyond were deep into the junk wax era of baseball cards. This is where some of the most popular cards, like the Barry Bonds 86 Topps Trade. We got the 87 Mark McGwire and the 87 Donruss Bo Jackson rookies. But all these cards are being mass produced. This is actually when I was really scooping up cards as a kid. And then in 1988 and 89, Score, Leaf, it all came back, and then Topps actually brought back Bowman. So there's new competition in the market, and Topps, with its acquisition of Bowman in 1955-56, they brought it back, and this 89 Bowman Ken Griffey Jr. card is actually iconic and super obviously relevant at that time. But I think one of the biggest disruptors to the market at this time is 1989 Upper Deck. So Upper Deck had improved paper quality, amazing photography, improved writing on the back, and then they were the first like premium baseball cards. So while packs of cards were going for about 50 cents at the time, these were $1, 99 cents, I guess. I remember paying $1.25 for some of these packs because they were so popular and they were actually selling out. They sold out so fast that Upper Deck pre-sold its entire 1990 baseball stock before the 1990 season. And then you can see the hologram on the back at the bottom of the card as another way to kind of put like a proof that the card was legitimate. And these packs are sold in the foil instead of wax paper, and so they were supposedly tamper evident. Beautiful cards. The Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck rookie is actually the most graded baseball card of all time. I have a different video about that, but over 100,000 of those have been graded by PSA alone. That's like the height of the kind of junk wax era, and being one of the most premium cards at the time. So in response, in 1991, Topps created Topps Stadium Club, which is their effort to create a premium line of cards similar to what Upper Deck was doing. Had premium card stock. I get a kick out of seeing the Kodak logo on the box, saying Kodak quality images, and they mentioned artistic photos. I'm not in love with all of them, but they certainly have a different feel to baseball cards. So we got Nolan Ryan in a tuxedo, Jeff Bagwell leaning on the bleachers and so forth. Topps continued to try and distinguish themselves each year from its competitors, and there's just a ton of different cards that are coming out at the time. We'll go through a little bit of that here. So 1991 to 1992, gold foil is introduced, as well as insert cards and parallels. So we'll start with gold foil. So the 1991 Topps created a parallel set which were identical to the regular 1991 Topps cards, but they had this Desert Shield logo. And the Desert Shield cards are extremely popular because there's very few of them, and they were made exclusively for the troops stationed in the Middle East for Operation Desert Shield, and only about 6,000 of each card was produced. And so they're pretty rare. Some of those cards were found in warehouses and never shipped overseas, so there's some in circulation, but they're still pretty hard to find and catch a nice premium, and you can see the gold foil on that one. The Donruss Diamond Kings is one of the first inserts where you can see there's a gold foil around the card here, and they were just randomly inserted into cards. That was really popular. And then parallels are when the 1992 Topps had a regular set and then a gold card of each player. So I actually own a couple 1992, Topps traded Nomar Garciaparras in regular and in gold. Unfortunately, they are not worth as much as what I paid for them way back in the day when Nomar was doing great. But this new technology of gold foil is starting to create more premium offerings in baseball cards. I didn't know that it was this long ago, but 1993 is when Refractors came out. So Topps created its finest cards with Refractors for the first time. And so this is a reflective foil that gave the card this like shiny rainbow appearance. And these are hard to find good images of. You have to kind of take the picture of the card at an angle so the light can hit it properly so you can really see this hologram foil. So other card manufacturers followed as well with the kind of reflective foil finishes and so forth, but 1993 is when Refractors were introduced. 1997 was when game-used memorabilia was introduced by Upper Deck. So they've got pieces of the jersey, swatches of baseball bats. There was also pieces of bats, gloves, baseball caps, and even bases, and stadium seats that were used to create kind of game-used memorabilia in a bunch of these offerings, which I think is I get a kick out of it. And also 1997 was the first one-of-one. So Fleer created Flair Showcase masterpieces, which would be one-of-one masterpieces, just like this one here of David Cone. And they were serial numbered and random inserts, which were really popular. So the one-of-one trend started actually in the late 90s. And then also in 1998, die cuts started becoming popular. So this one happens to be a die cut with kind of a foil or refractor look to it. This one is the Vlad Guerrero, but die cut is where the baseball card is no longer a rectangle. You can see unique shape, and they go on to crazier and crazier shapes. And then in 2000 and 2001 is when Chrome came out. So Topps brought it in Topps Chrome in 2000. 2001 they brought it to their Bowman Chrome, and obviously this is a Bowman Chrome refractor. So these really set the stage for some of the most cherished baseball cards. If you're looking for more modern rookies, generally the Topps Chrome and Topps Chrome refractors are the ones that people get. Only a select number of players had Chrome card each year, which is roughly 200 to 220 players that were included in Chrome in each of the years. And with all of these advancements in technology and all these new offerings, in 2006, the Major League Baseball Players Association strikes back, and they cut ties with all these different manufacturers except for Upper Deck and Topps. So those are the only two card companies that were allowed to produce cards. Donruss was left out, and Donruss couldn't produce anymore. And they did this in part because there were just so many different offerings that demand for baseball cards was actually kind of declining. There was too much kind of just random stuff in the market. And then in 2009, Topps got an exclusive deal with baseball, kind of cutting out Upper Deck. So we've come to full circle where in 2009, Topps gets a monopoly again. Upper Deck did release a Series 1 product in 2010, but was sued for copyright infringement because of this deal by both Topps and Major League Baseball. As part of the settlement, Upper Deck was allowed to sell the rest of that inventory of the Series 1 product, but then could produce no more further products. So from that point on, Topps was the only licensed baseball card manufacturer up till today. But that doesn't mean they didn't have competition. It's amazing that in 2011, Panini showed up as an unlicensed baseball card manufacturer. And so they inked a deal with Major League Baseball Players Association that allowed them to use the likeness and names, but not the team logos, because that would be a Major League Baseball thing. So Panini had to Photoshop, you can see the hats and uniforms and everything, they had to Photoshop the team logos and the team names, and you'll see even on this, on the right side, the George Springer card, it's kind of small down here in the corner, but it says Houston baseball team instead of talking about the Astros. So these were generally sold for much less than Topps cards. They really had nice designs and high-end offerings, but because they didn't have the official logos on them, they're kind of seen as second fiddle to Topps. So that brings us to 2021, which enters the Fanatics monopoly. So in somewhat of a surprise, at the peak of the baseball card interest during the pandemic, Major League Baseball ended its exclusive deal with Topps, and then gave an exclusive deal to Fanatics. Fanatics secured long-term exclusive rights from Major League Baseball, the Major League Baseball Players Association, the NBA, the NBA Players Association, and the NFL Players Association, all which will start in 2026. This was a devastating blow. Many people couldn't imagine what it will be like without Topps. And actually, it forced the sale of Topps to Fanatics. So if you're Topps, you don't have the rights to sell licensed baseball cards anymore. I think they realized the only thing to do was to actually sell to Fanatics. So Fanatics acquired Topps in 2022, and what we know is that Topps and team logos will continue through 2025. Fanatics has the exclusive rights in 2026 and beyond, and now that they own Topps, they'll be producing under multiple of the Topps brands for sure. So what's my take on all this? Well, I haven't been in too much of the ultra modern cards as it is, so nothing for me is really changing with this new monopoly by Fanatics, because all of my favorite baseball cards, the historical baseball cards and cards I like to flip, have already been produced and they're out there in market. So I'll follow Fanatics and I'll see if there's any new cards or some of the new players like Ellie De La Cruz and so forth, and what their new cards or offerings are. But from what I teach in my course about how to flip baseball cards, or even the flip list, which shows all of these Hall of Fame vintage cards, and when you can buy them for a good price and sell them, to me none of that changes, but it's really fascinating to follow the kind of history of baseball cards through all of this. And so thank you so much, really appreciate your time. Make sure you like and subscribe, and then check out these other videos that we have here for you.